So let us discuss about administrative law. Okay, so of course everybody, I think all of you are aware about the definition of administrative law as, you know, traditionally defined by Roscoe Pound. Okay, but of course we're not here into, you know, memorization, but of course if you're going to dissect the definition of administrative law by Roscoe Pound, okay, of course it is the, of course administrative law would be the law which involves the relationship of particularly the executive department in its, you know, in its powers and duties in executing the law, particularly in order for the executive department, or particularly the president, or of course in some other places the prime minister, would execute the functions of the executive functions. Of course it has to deal it with how are they going to either implement, or how are they going to adjudicate it within their confines and bounds. That is why if you read your definition of administrative law, there is this particularity that of course the executive will be in the exercise of their implementation or their lawmaking power, as well as their quasi-judicial power. So it's two. It's either your lawmaking or quasi-legislative power, as well as your quasi-judicial power or administrative adjudication. Okay, so of course old books would consider quasi-legislative power as subordinate legislation. Insofar as quasi-judicial functions is concerned, or powers are concerned, they call it administrative adjudication. Okay, so what is the importance of administrative law? Of course, the importance of your administrative law would always lie in this concept of policy making. Of course, when an administration would be able to stamp their, you know, their legacy as the administration, or in their administration, okay, they have to set their policies. Okay, of course in setting the policies you have to comply with the tenets of administrative law. Okay, of course the president is limited by the rules and the particular nuances of said branch of political law. Okay, so of course as the executive would be limited as to the concept of how are they going to implement the law, or in some cases how are they going to administratively adjudicate certain measures, okay, in order for the executive to fulfill its duty to implement as well as to execute the laws. Okay, all right, so of course the first question is in most of your books is, what is this concept of administration? I think the concept of government and administration is clear in your revised Administrative Code of 1987. If you're going to look at the definition of government and administration, it is clear how the said law defines it. Now, of course, what's the point in discussing administration by itself? Of course, administration would not be possible if government, okay, would not be giving this delegation among each offices as assigned by law. So here example, in a basic minimum, if you're going to skim your revised Administrative Code of 1987, okay, you would observe that, you know, in your revised Administrative Code that there are offices already created. Like for example, the civil service is already created, and then of course there's this definition of a department, an office, a bureau. Because why is it important that there is a definition? What is a department? What is an office? What is a bureau? Because of course these entities, okay, or instrumentalities within this administrative framework. So it's considered part of your framework. Of course, if you're going to be a little bit graphic about it, you would see most of this in organizational charts. Okay, so of course, example, you have the president on the top of your organizational chart. Of course, the ones below them would be the department heads, okay, or the secretaries. Then the secretaries would have their either a undersecretary or undersecretary or an assistant secretary, then the assistant secretary would be assigned either bureaus or offices, okay, to handle. Of course, the bureaus and offices are being led by certain appointments. So it's either a bureau, example, in the Department of Finance, you would have of course the president as the top of on the top of the chain. Then let's say the Department of Finance is the alter ego as its cabinet representative representing finance. Now of course, the Department of Finance handles or is in control of certain particular offices like the Bangko Sentral of Pilipinas, the SEC, the BIR, okay, the Bureau of Customs. So there are offices which are under there are offices and bureaus, okay, or commissions sometimes like the SEC, okay. So these are offices, bureaus or commissions that are under the control, under the direction of your department secretary. And of course your commissions or your offices also have their divisions within their structure, okay, up until the last employee, okay. So that's your structure of your administrative law, and that's more or less suggested by your revised administrative code, okay. But of course, with that structure, there would be this concept that who creates the offices. Of course, the one that creates the offices would be the, as of course, what is the, so of course our question is who creates the offices. As a rule, of course, the one that creates the offices would be Congress, di ba? So for example, all of those offices or bureaus, okay, or let's say the department by itself. The department by itself is created by an office. Of course, some of the main offices are in your revised administrative code. But of course, there would be later offices that are that of course through the years, of course there would be this morphing, okay, of their identity. So for example, if you can recall, education used to be Department of Education, Culture and Sports. Nowadays, they are now split because they remove already culture and sports. They now designate the culture more on the the National Historical Institute or other cultural offices. Okay, I mean culture related offices. Then of course, when it comes to sports, you now go to your other commissions like the Philippine Sports Commission. Okay, then of course the DepEd became purely on education. So there is a law that modified the DEX into the DepEd. Okay. Then of course there would be other cabinet level departments which are created later on because of course of the exigencies or the needs of the nation or the state. Like for example, before we have the Department of Labor and Employment. Then when it comes to OFWs, they are under either the OWA and the POEA. But a few years ago, the Congress, as well as of course as endorsed by the president, of course their cooperation at the time, they decided to create a separate department for OFW. So we have now the DMW. So the DMW that is what is now the DMW, that's now comprised of the POEA and of course other offices like the OWA. Now the POEA has already, insofar as the DMW is concerned, the POEA was converted into the DMW. Okay? Then of course there are still other offices. Ganun din that's going to be true, or it's also the same with your, for example, in housing and urban settlements. Before, it's used to be under the HLURB. Okay? But nowadays, it's now under the Department of Urban Settlements and Department of Urban Settlements and and Housing Development. Okay? So yung tinatawag nating DSUD. So DSUD is a new law. It's RA 12101 yata yon. So if I just check on the number, but that's relatively also new law. The DSUD is relatively created by the legislature in order to address urban development and urban and housing development concerns. Okay, so the ones that is now under that, this was usually some of the functions of the HLURB as well as some of the functions of the NHA. So there was a creation of a new department. Okay, so of course under the new department there is also a creation of offices. So now, of course, some of those creations of the creation of the offices under the departments, of course, you would observe there would be offices which have original charter. Okay, so when they have original charter, it's similar to a department. It's created by the imprimatur of Congress. Of course, there would be some GOCCs or other offices which are not necessarily created by, it is not necessarily created by law. So it can be created, if it's example a GOCC without charter, it can be established through an executive order. That's a possibility by the president. Okay, then of course the executive order would empower those assigned to create a private corporation. Okay, nowadays it's now under the government, the GCG. Okay, kung magke-create ka ng other government offices which are not chartered in nature. Okay, so pero ganun din yung, that's the same function. Of course, the hierarchy, you would see the hierarchy there. Okay, now the question now is, can it be abolished? Of course, insofar as offices or departments which are which was this established by law, of course the law can only abolish them. Okay, but what about other offices, okay, created by the president? Of course, the answer there is yes, they can create it, but of course these are subject to your formalities. That is why if you're going to look at your administrative code, there is this provision, particularly section 31 of your administrative code, of the administrative code. So note that in section 31 of your administrative code, okay, so this authorizes the president to restructure the internal organization of the office of the president proper, including immediate offices, the president's special assistants or advisor systems, and the common immediate offices. Okay, immediate offices. Okay, then there's also the common staff support system by abolishing, consolidating, or merging units thereof, or transferring functions from one unit to another, and to transfer functions or offices from the office of the president to any other department or agency in the executive branch, and vice versa. Okay, so there is this power, but note that section 31 is just limited to these matters. So as explained in Banda versus Ermita, okay, so concomitant to such power to abolish, merge, or consolidate offices in the office of the president proper, and to transfer functions, offices not only among the offices of the office of the president but the rest of the OP and the executive branch, the president implicitly has the power to effect less radical or less substantive changes to the functional and internal structure of the office of the president, including the modification of functions of such executive agencies as the exigencies of service may require. So in the case of Banda versus Ermita, this involves the reorganization of the National Printing Office, if I can recall. Okay, so in this case, okay, there was neither an abolition of the National Printing Office or a removal of any of its functions to be transferred to another agency. So under the assailed executive order, which is Executive Order 378, the National Printing Office remains the main printing arm of the government for all kinds of government forms and publications. But now, it must compete with the private sector for certain government printing jobs, with the exception of election paraphernalia, which remains to be the responsible of the NPO together with the Bangko Sentral Pilipinas. Okay, so at most there is a mere alteration of the main function of the NPO by limiting the exclusivity of its printing responsibility, but it doesn't necessarily. So in this case, this is more of a restructuring. So this restructuring was allowed, and it did not transgress, or there was no grave abuse of discretion on the part of the office of the president in the modification of the roles of the National Printing Office. Okay, then we go to Biraogo versus Philippine Truth Commission of 2010. So if you can recall Biraogo, of course, this is the creation of the Truth Commission. So this was the commission which was created primarily to investigate all the alleged corrupt issues being hurled against then just fresh from getting out of the office the former President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. So of course the next administration created this Philippine Truth Commission. Of course, I think this was discussed in your equal protection clause, that there is a discrimination as to why is it only selective or discriminatory as to the administration of President Arroyo. But of course, there was also an argument as to whether or not the creation of the Philippine Truth Commission was legal by itself. So, of course, the argument of the state here, okay, was, well, they are claiming that the Philippine Truth Commission was restructured in accordance to Section 31 of the Revised Administrative Code. But the Supreme Court did not agree with the arguments of the Solicitor General. So, because Section 31 clearly refers to the reduction of personnel, consolidation of offices, or abolition thereof by reason of economy or redundancy of functions. So these point to situations where a body or an office is already existent but a modification or alteration thereof is needed, okay, or should be effected, okay. So the creation of an office is nowhere mentioned, much less envisioned in the said provision. So accordingly, the answer to the question is, of course, into the negative, because to say that the Philippine Truth Commission is born out of a restructuring of the office of the President under Section 31, even in the plainest meaning attributable to the term restructure or an alteration of an existing structure, the PTC was not part of this structure of the office of the President prior to the enactment of Executive Order number 1. So, you have to note Section 31 because as a rule, you cannot abolish an office without Congress abolishing it. That is why it is always an argument during, especially in the Senate deliberations or on budget. I think you have been listening to this, especially with the confidential funds issue. But note that in deciding on the funds, of course, there would be instances where sometimes Congress would have this penchant of trying to tell the other offices that you're not really doing much in your job. We might be giving you zero budget, okay? So if there would be zero budget, it's virtually an abolition of the office because you're not giving a budget anymore to that particular office, okay? So sometimes when there is a need to restructure, of course, Congress would be able to take note of why there should be a need to restructure a main department or agency before, but it cannot be, the rule is you cannot abolish it as if just the president will just declare, oh, there's no more office, okay? That's not possible, but it can be only possible if there is a restructuring, okay, which is under your Section 31, as long as the executive department would be able to argue that what they acted is within the reasons of Section 31 of the Revised Administrative Code. That's going to be a valid exercise of the streamlining or restructuring of government offices and functions, okay? So you try to note that it might come out in the bar that, of course, there might be a certain office. You try to look if there is a need to look if the facts of the case would relate to a restructuring or an abolition. So I think the facts would dictate itself if it's going to be an abolition or if it's going to be a creation which is unauthorized. You can see through the facts of the problem depending on how it is presented, okay? All right, now let's go now to, of course, this is the meat of administrative law. So we now discuss about the concept of delegation of powers, okay? So of course, we understand that, of course, Congress passes the laws, then the executive department, they implement the law or execute the law. But sometimes it doesn't necessarily mean that, of course, we have the law has been passed, okay? It contains certain provisions or certain pieces of legislation within that structure of that Republic Act or that statute. That statute, of course, it depends on the statute. So, for example, if your statute is directly executory, there's no problem. Like, for example, Revised Penal Code, okay? Theoretically, it's a little bit direct. But in theory, there is a delegation there because the delegate there would be the judges, okay? the judges is the one who's going to decide on the sentence, di ba? Ng example, criminal case. You wanted to decide the case if a person is guilty of murder or unjust vexation. Of course, the delegate there is your judge, okay? In theory, okay? But of course, if you're going to look at it, it's a little bit direct, okay? Of course, the issue now is, of course, that's one example. But a more particular example, especially when we discuss the provisions of administrative law, is, of course, especially nowadays, most of our laws, although there would be laws, most of these laws are not necessarily executory, or the laws may, over time, there might be changes in the times, okay? So the structure of of the laws would entail the executive department to formulate policies in order to implement the said law, okay? So I think you would be very much familiar sometimes that you would hear that there is a new law, then the next thing that we're going to hear is, let's wait for the IRR, or the implementing rules or regulations. So for example, in, let's say, taxation, sometimes there would be a new tax measure. Now, you would hear later on that, of course, it now depends if the BIR would issue implementing rules or regulation. It might be in a form of a revenue memorandum order or a memorandum circular. It depends on the level in which the office what office would implement the same. So the point is, of course, we have the words of the law, but because of the complexities of certain matters, okay, there might be a need to issue implementing rules and regulations. So that is your delegation of powers in action, okay? That's your delegation in powers in action. Now, of course, now the question is, what are permissive modes of delegation of power? I think this has already been discussed in constitutional law, but of course, if you can recall, the mnemonic here is petal, okay? So what is those permissive forms of delegation as mandated by the Constitution? So the first one would be people at large, which would refer to the power of the people to initiate amendments through initiative or referendum. Then we have emergency powers. This is your Article 6, Section 23, okay? So there is this power of the president to issue tariffs, okay? But these are delegated powers which the Constitution particularly assigns, okay? Of course, there are limitations as to tariff as well as, of course, emergency powers, okay? Of course, emergency powers is Article 6, Section 23. Tariff powers is within your Article 6, Section 28, okay? 28, then there is a subparagraph there. If I can recall, it's subparagraph 2, okay? That refers to the tariffs, okay? So when we speak of tariffs, of course, these are tax measures, but there is a delegation. Of course, the simple requirement that is being asked as to emergency and tariff powers, particularly in emergency powers, that emergency power should be there's a particular duration. I think this has already been ruled in the classic case of Araneta versus Dinglasan, that it cannot be forever. There must be a fixed duration in order for that law, because of course emergency powers or tariff powers would entail the passage of Congress of a statute authorizing that emergency powers. But because of Araneta versus Dinglasan, you have to limit the authority. There is a duration when are you going to exercise that power. Kaya nga, 'di ba, if you can recall, recently, 'di ba, pass ng Bayanihan 1 and Bayanihan 2. So practically those are emergency measures. And note that both Bayanihan 1 and Bayanihan 2 has an expiry date, okay? So it shows that it is a legislature aimed to giving emergency powers to the president and other offices during the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, okay? All right, then we have our administrative agency. This is the one that we're discussing. Like, of course, there is this concept of subordinate legislation. of course, there are purposes to this. So it's either to, of course, fill in the gaps. Okay, so note the concept of fill in the gaps. Your concept of fill in the gaps is limited by this. Of course, if you have heard the Latin maxim, di ba, potestas delegata, non potest delegari. Okay, so you cannot, it's particularly in simple terms, the spring cannot rise beyond the source. The power that is delegated should not be as high, or it's not as high as what is being dictated by the word of the law. Okay, so your IRRs should be subservient with your law itself. Okay, so one good particular example as we speak right now, if you can recall, of course this is a little bit okay, but note that in, of course, today is 2024. Okay, so if you can recall the case involving Attorney Macalintal and COMELEC, the recent one, I think there was a provision in the COMELEC resolution saying that appointed officials are not deemed resigned. Okay, of course, Attorney Macalintal questioned that measure. It's now under temporary restraining order as we speak. But of course, what would be the ground of Attorney Macalintal? Obviously, the ground there is, of course, under the current laws on current election laws. An appointed official is deemed resigned. Okay, and since it's dictated by the law, of course, Attorney Macalintal has this argument that you cannot change that unless you're going to amend the law itself. That's only the time when there might be a change, but it cannot be changed through an implementing resolution by the COMELEC. That's his argument there. Now, of course, we cannot discuss, but at least you get the drift on how is it being exercised. Then, finally, we have local government. There is this express delegation under the Constitution that the local government exercises. There is a delegation as to the exercise of their powers under the LGC. Okay? Of course, when we now speak of delegation of powers, we have now this concept of the test on valid delegation. So I think there are two tests that is already been established. We have the completeness test and the sufficiency of standards test. Okay, so of course, the completeness test, this is the one that was first enunciated in your People versus Ang Tang Ho. Okay, so in the completeness test, a law is complete when it sets forth therein the policy to be executed, carried out, or implemented by the delegate. Then later on, there was this concept of sufficiency of standards. So, of course, when we speak of sufficiency of standards, a law lays down a sufficient standard when it provides adequate guidelines or limitations in the law to map out the boundaries of the delegate's authority and prevent the delegation from running riot. To be sufficient, the standard must specify the limits of the delegate's authority, announce the legislative policy, and identify the conditions under which it is to be implemented. So of course, there are two. The nuances is the difference between that is this. When we speak of completeness, is the law complete? Does the law is there a need for the delegate to do something else? Okay, so in the sufficiency of standard, you do not look upon the completeness of the law, but rather you're going to look if there are standards that is applicable. Like, for example, general welfare. General welfare is one of the accepted standards which can be considered sufficient in nature, or there is a public policy consideration. That's also considered as a sufficient standard. Okay, so of course, because of this case of, I think, Palaez versus Auditor General, the Supreme Court usually uses the two tests. Okay, hand in hand. Okay, so if you can recall, si Enot versus COMELEC. Okay, si Enot versus COMELEC, it's both of a it depends. It did not really stated directly. Of course, if we can recall Inut versus Comelec, this is the implementation of that executive order banning the use of Carabao beef. Okay, problem is in the executive order, I think it's 626-A. There is this provision that if the Carabaos are that the Carabaos confiscated would be collected by the meat inspector or the police, the the delegate which would be the NMIC representative or the police who confiscated the Carabaos, they have this power as they may seem fit as to what they are going to do with the confiscated items. So of course so the Supreme Court determined that it the concept of may see fit in the law might be unbridled discretion on the part of the delegate. Okay, so the Supreme Court held here that of course one searches in vain for the usual standard and the reasonable guidelines, or better still the limitations of the said officers. So there are no limitations that are dictated in your EO 626-A. So and then of course there are other factors that would say that it's an invalid exercise of police power, as well as it is also there is no sufficient standards to hold this as a valid administrative regulation. Okay, so that's your concept of your sufficient standards. Okay, now of course there are certain cases, like I think I used as for example Lagman versus Executive Secretary and Belica versus Executive Secretary. These are examples where there is a determination that there is sufficient standard. So here particularly in Lagman there is this so it is able to pass the completeness and sufficient standards, because the law itself creates for guidelines, appropriate guidelines in the abolition or creation of GOCCs under the GCG law. Okay, then all of those standards pass this muster of it's complete by itself. Okay, so then of course we have Belica, okay, versus Executive Secretary. Of course, there are policy considerations that were considered in the point as to the local government support fund. Okay, so of course it's complete because there is an indication that it is for genuine local development. Okay, then of course it is also sufficient in standard because, well, it has adequate guidelines, okay, or adequate guidelines or limitations to map out the boundaries. So with the combination of the two tests, okay, the Supreme Court has more or less they use the two tests in order to determine the validity of such delegated exercise of police power. And note that these are more or less tests insofar as subordinate legislation is concerned. Okay, in the mnemonic petal, it's your administrative regulations aspect that is usually being dissected here. Okay, all right. Then of course, when we now speak about, of course, what are the two powers. So we have quasi legislative power and quasi judicial power. So when we speak of quasi legislative power, okay, of course the elements of your valid administrative regulation. So this is, of course, your promulgation must be authorized by the legislature. It must be promulgated in accordance with the prescribed procedure. It must be within the scope of the authority given by the legislature, and it must be reasonable. Then, additionally, if it is penal in nature, as enunciated in People versus Maseren, okay, a 1979 case. Of course, there is an addition that the law authorizing administrative authorities to issue rules and regulations must itself declare as punishable the violation of the rules and regulations issued. Then the law must define or fix the penalty. Then publication must be made. So usually what is being done here is, of course, if there are penal sanctions in your laws, okay, they're just going to replicate it in the implementing rules, then they're going to republish it. That's usually the thing that they are these are ways how to make to uphold its legality as to the formality. And of course, we have publication requirements and their effects. Okay, so of course, we just read the cases, like for example in Boyd Takeda Chemicals versus De La Serna. There is this issue as to what is considered as basic salary under the 13-month pay law. Okay, so the Supreme Court here determined that, of course, the memorandum order that was issued by the Department of Labor detracted from they added on the rules on the definition of basic salary. In adding that definition, they acted in grave abuse of discretion. Particularly, there is this violation that, of course, administrative regulations must be in harmony with the provisions of the law. So in this case, there was a expansion of the definition of basic salary, which was not allowed. Okay, all right. So then we have Lupanco versus Court of Appeals. This one, of course, there is no reasonableness with the regulation of the PRC at that time. And of course, in order to prevent, in an attempt to prevent leakages, okay, there is this there is this order that you cannot attend a review center. Okay, so the Supreme Court held that, well, the regulation is unreasonable. It's unreasonable because of course there's no legal basis, because what's the causal connection of banning someone into enrolling into a review center at least a few days before the supposed exam? So what's the connection? There's not even a genuine way to solve any problem of the supposed leakage, diba, as the case may be. Okay, then we have, of course, Executive Secretary versus Southwing. So here the rule, so of course the rule making power of the public administrative body is a delegated legislative power which may not be used either to abridge the authority given by Congress or the Constitution, or to enlarge its power. So constitutional and statutory provisions control what rules and regulations may be promulgated by such a body, as well to respect to what fields are subject to regulation by it. It may not make rules and regulations which are inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution or the statute, particularly the statute in which it is administering or created it. Okay, so there should be limited as to what the law provides. Okay, then of course freedom from that only this involves, I think, the publication. So if there is a requirement of publication in order to satisfy the notice to the public, okay, it must be complied with. Okay, if you're not going to comply with the publication requirement, that might be a violation of due process. Okay, so if there is a need for publication, you have to do so. Sometimes, especially in example here, this is an energy regulatory commission case, okay, an ERC case. In practice, usually the electric cooperative or the distribution utility who wants to ask for a petition for increase or for an increase in the rates or any other petition, they usually not overcompensate. They usually do it in a superfluous manner. So aside from the publication in your newspaper, there is also a necessity for them to give notices to radio stations or to television stations to inform that there would be a public consultation hearing or something to that extent in order to comply with due process formalities. Okay, then of course when we speak of course publication requirement, I think this was already discussed this was a little bit discussed in your in your procedural due process. Okay, note that as a rule, if there is a requirement of publication, you should need to do the publication. And if you're going to go back to your Administrative Code of 1987, there's also a requirement that you need to provide a copy to the UP Law Center, particularly to the ONAR. Okay, yung Office of National yung Administrative Registry, where they keep all of these administrative rules and regulations. But note that there are exceptions to this, di ba? So the exceptions to this would be more or less if it is purely procedural in nature, or there is not a really need a necessity to do the publication requirement. So there are certain cases in which they question the example. I think it's Kawad. One of the cases would be Kawad versus Abad. The Supreme Court held there that if it's just a mere procedural rule, there is no need for the requirement of a full-blown publication. Okay, all right. Then we have quasi-judicial power. Of course, when we speak of quasi-judicial power, we can recall the discussions as to administrative due process. Okay, so when we speak of administrative due process, okay, we speak of course, ang Tibay versus CIR. So there are seven requisites there, or 7 guidelines that were provided in ang Tibay. But of course, when we some of them they are already within your concept of procedural due process. Of course, 'di ba, ano ang first requirement ng ang Tibay? There should be an actual hearing, 'di ba? There must be a hearing as much as possible. Then but of course, we have to then of course most of should have a hearing. There should be a presentation of evidence. Okay, there must be due process. There must be impartiality. And that's part of even if your procedural due process. But usually when I discuss ang Tibay, I dissect particular provisions. Like for example, in ang Tibay, there is a discussion of what kind of evidence are you going to use or utilize in administrative cases. So, ang Tibay established the substantive evidence. So, of course, there's a definition of what is substantive evidence. It is it's not just a mere scintilla, but it would create a reasonable mind to determine whether or not there should be relief, di ba? So, that's your substantive evidence. Then, of course, we have this concept of a non-technical approach. So, although there should be a notice, there should be a hearing, okay? It's not necessarily should be strict insofar as procedure is concerned, okay? However, there are certain cases, like for example, in Saunar versus Ermita, if you can recall in Saunar versus Ermita, if there is really a requirement imposed by their rules, they should comply with their rules, because otherwise, if they're not going to comply with their rules, there might be a violation of due process, as the case may be, okay? Then we have then of course the most important thing about administrative due process is, and I always emphasize this even in my previous in administrative law, is the concept of independent consideration, or not simply accept the views of a subordinate in arriving at a decision. So how are we going to illustrate this? So for example, you are in the NLRC, okay? So if the one that decided your case is arbiter A, di ba? Later on, arbiter A became a commissioner of the NLRC. So of course, one of the parties would be appealing the case, okay? Let us say that there is that the case went to the division where the arbiter is, di ba? That let's say the arbiter was promoted as a commissioner. The case was raffled in that commission where the previous arbiter is there. Of course, under this concept of independent consideration, that arbiter cannot decide on that case, because this would be a violation of the concept of independent consideration of the facts. Because if you are the former labor arbiter, you're practically violating the concept of not simply accepting that views of that subordinate, okay, in arriving at a decision, okay? So that's the interplay there, okay? Then so the usual example that I usually use there would be, of course, si Ansaldo versus Clave. Then of course the more updated case of Tejano versus Ombudsman, where it clearly illustrated that the hearing officer cannot so note that when we speak of independent consideration, this is more or less a call for there should not be any direct bias, because there would be a direct bias on the part of that subordinate who does not have an independent consideration. Okay, so that would hamper the due process of that administrative case if that subordinate would rule, which would not be now considered as an independent consideration of the facts. Okay, all right, then of course we now go to this concept of exhaustion of administrative remedies. So okay, so what do you mean by exhaustion? So of course, I think I kind of discussed the concept of hierarchy. Okay, so of course department. So what I discussed it from up to down. Okay. Now of course in a regular government transaction, okay, let's say a petition by itself, we go upwards. Okay, so if you can recall, most of our system is vertical in nature. So you start first with the lower offices, then if there would be an issue on there is a necessity of appeal or elevation, it depends on the case. You go up, okay? You go up to the next office, until you reach the top, okay? So now when we now speak, so of course there is this concept of qualified political agency, okay? So when we speak of qualified political agency, it should go up to this you should not be jumping over that qualified political agency. You should go through that process, lest that you're going now to violate your concept of exhaustion of administrative remedies. I think I kind of illustrated this previously. Example, the DENR. Okay, so when we speak of the DENR, and even up to this day, okay, when we speak of the DENR, you go from their lower offices, then you're going to appeal to the office where the hearing officer would decide the case. Then you're going to elevate it to the secretary, okay, of the natural resources. Now, after you go up to the secretary of natural resources, do you need to go up further? Can you do now judicial review? The answer there is no, because according to Tan versus the Director of Forestry, you still have to go up to the office of the president. Okay? Now, when would be the instances where you should not go up to the office of the president? Those instances is, of course, when a law provides that you can now entertain judicial review. So, in the case of the DENR, when it comes to appeals to their offices, there are no particular laws into saying that after the Secretary of Justice, they can now do a mode of judicial review. Okay? So, you have to go to the office of the president, because you're not going to exhaust it if you're not going to go up to the office of the president. Besides, one of the grounds for a Rule 43, which is the the default judicial review of decisions of quasi-judicial agencies, the office of the president is in the list. Okay? It's in the list. But let us say that the office is different. Let's say the office that we're talking about is the HSAC, the Human Settlements Adjudication Commission. Okay? Previously, this was under the HURB, but because of the DSUD law, we have now the HSAC. So the HSAC has jurisdiction over. It has now jurisdiction over certain particular cases like homeowners association cases. Now let us say there is an homeowner association issue. Of course, there would be a hearing officer from the HSAC who would rule on the case. Okay. Now let us say the case was ruled. Of course, someone is bound to appeal the case. You now elevate the case to the HSAC Board of Commissioners. Okay. So when you go up now to the HSAC Board of Commissioners, they're going to decide on the merits of the case. Now, after you go up to the HSAC Board of Commissions, okay, let us say there is a ruling already. Where are you going to go? Are you going to go to the office of the president? Because remember, the HSAC is a cabinet department, okay? would you now go up to the office of the president? The answer there is no, because if it is a homeowner issue, and if it involves an homeowner issue, okay, there is a provision in your Magna Carta for homeowners that in cases involving decisions of the commission, okay, at that time it was the HLURB, it's now, but now because the HSAC now assumes the quasi judicial aspect of it, it's now subsumed to the HSAC. Now, under the Magna Carta for homeowners, the aggrieved party can now file a mode of judicial review under Rule 43, okay? Because it's particularly stated in your RA 9904. So, if there is a provision in a law which allows now for judicial review, you can now jump to judicial review. But in the absence of such ruling, okay, you cannot jump, okay? You cannot jump, okay? So, all right. So of course, there is this discussion of course, when we speak of exhaustion of administrative remedies, I think I kind of discussed this before. There is this concept that if you're not going to comply with the exhaustion, it would affect the ripeness of the adjudication of the case, because you have not yet accomplished what is above, okay? So it might be a ground for the dismissal of your judicial review because there's not yet an actual case, okay, or controversy as the case may be. Then of course, alter ego, of course, I think I kind of discussed about the appeal to the president. Of course, when we speak of alter ego, of course, there are certain acts in which the department acts as the alter ego of the president, okay? But note that in certain cases, and I think this was already asked in the 2024 bar, note that when we speak of alter ego, this refers to this purely alter ego setup by the structure. But if the structure or the question arises from the act of the cabinet secretary or department in an ex officio capacity, which is as stated by law, okay? There are several cases, example, Napocor versus Commission on Audit for one, okay? Which states that the alter ego doctrine would not apply if it is an ex officio an ex officio role of that cabinet secretary, okay? So then of course, judicial review, of course, your judicial review, I think it's standard. It's either questions of law, questions of fact, and mixed questions of law and fact, okay? So yung natawag natin Brandeis assimilation of facts, okay? So that's applicable to your judicial review, okay? So alright, so that is it for administrative law, okay?